While some have welcomed the certainty today's announcement gives businesses and homeowners, critics argue the policy will simply encourage more borrowing at the expense of saving. Well, joining me now are Julia Chanteray, who runs The Joy of Business, a consultancy specialising in helping small businesses to develop and grow, and Simon Rose from the campaign group Save Our Savers. Well, Julia Chanteray first. There is an argument, isn't there, that this wasn't needed, this announcement today, that the economy was recovering and sooner or later we're going to have dangerous levels of inflation?
Well, here in Brighton, our economy has been quite resilient, more resilient than other parts of the UK, certainly. But the economy as a whole in the UK is still very fragile. And I think that anything that happens right now to damage businesses' ability to borrow, businesses' ability to invest in itself, and to create more jobs could be damaging that recovery substantially.
Simon Rose, you don't want to nip the green buds in the bud, do you?
No, not at all. I agree with what Julia said, except low interest rates are not the answer. They haven't produced growth for 4 years. If that's all it took for an economy to grow, then we'd have no interest rates at all. The problem is that with low interest rates, you get investment going to the wrong areas of the economy, to uneconomic businesses. You also uncork the inflation genie. And the problem is the Bank of England, which always gets inflation forecasts wrong anyway, has decided that a little bit more inflation is not going to hurt. The problem is we've already got not only savers and pensioners, anybody on a fixed income suffering from inflation and low interest rates, but we've now got the lowest real wages for 10 years, and more inflation will make that worse.
But people like the Rileys, who I met earlier today, would be sunk if interest rates went up much further. You've got to spare a thought for them, haven't you?
When you've got an economy that cannot cope with a small rise in interest rates, then we are too dependent upon borrowing. The problem is, we're in this mess because of over-borrowing, consumption led by borrowing, and the problem is what we're going to be getting is even more borrowing and the hope that somehow it boosts the economy. The problem is if you undermine the savings culture in this country, there will be no money with which to invest.
Julia Chanteray, I mean, a rising tide of debt is no way to run the economy, is it? We've got to put an end to this.
There isn't a rising tide of debt, certainly not amongst consumers who have been paying back debt, and certainly not amongst businesses who have been paying back debt and have had real difficulties in borrowing further.
But you've got millions of householders who've got record low interest rates and are still struggling to pay the mortgage.
Well, that's to do with the house prices and how much they've had to borrow, not to do with the interest
But isn't
rates.
it counterproductive if you have this low debt, low interest rates, you encourage more debt, and then the house prices go up and up?
I don't think there's any evidence to say that low interest rates are encouraging people to borrow further. In fact, it's become deeply unfashionable to borrow. As soon as the words credit crunch came out, consumers stopped borrowing to fuel spending and cut back on their borrowing. And now, austerity is fashionable, cutting back on spending is fashionable, and paying off your credit cards is extremely fashionable.
Simon Rose, it's already all very well for the baby boomers who managed to get cheap housing and are now able to save, but other people can't even think about saving, can they?
No, it's not in the Bank of England's policy, but of course Help to Buy is going to make it fantastic for people who've already got homes or might just about now be able to get onto the housing ladder. But for everybody else, it's going to be incredibly difficult. And so there's a wealth effect for them. But as with all these things, what's happening is we're blowing asset bubbles. We're blowing bubbles in the housing market, in shares, in stocks. But for most people, those are beyond their reach at all. So everybody's suffering. We've now got this very bizarre thing where the interest rates are going to be linked to the unemployment level. So the biggest debtor of all, the government, now has an incentive not to cut unemployment. I think they have not thought through the unforeseen consequences that might result from this policy.
I think there's a lot of pressure on the government to reduce unemployment, not least the fact that it costs them money to keep people on the dole queue, and those people are not paying income tax, and those businesses that could be employing them are not benefiting from people working for them. So there's lots of incentives to reduce unemployment for the government and for all of us.
Julia Chanteray, Simon Rose, thank you very much for joining me.